Hey guys, in this video we're going to talk about hierarchical indexing. This feature is really exciting because it allows us to do some sophisticated data analysis and manipulation, especially if we're working with very high dimensional data. We spoke before about series. Series are one-dimensional data structures, and now we have data frames. Data frames are two-dimensional data structures, and hierarchical indexing works for both, basically for series and for data frames. So hierarchical indexing, as the name might suggest, is to use more than one index in a hierarchical way. So the best thing is to have a look at an example. If we create a new notebook and maybe give it a name like hierarchical indexing, say UK, and what I'm doing here is I'm doing the usual import to import our data frame. To import pandas as PD, and then here I have a Python dictionary that we're going to use to create a data frame. So the dictionary has multiple keys like city, rank, name, score 1 and score 2. And the city, we have a repetition here: Tripoli, Rome, Sydney. And then the rank, first, second, and so on and so forth. So let's create a data frame out of that using pd.dataframe. We pass it the raw data, and then we give it the column names: city, rank, name, score 1 and score 2. If we create that and display the data frame, this is what it looks like. And we know by default pandas gives us a default index, but what we wanted to do is use these two columns as our hierarchical index. And the way to do that is by using this function called set index. So I can say data frame dot set index, and what I can do here is I pass it two or more column names as a list, basically as a Python list. So what I'm saying here is create an index out of city and rank with option drop equals false. What that means is do not remove these columns, but rather create an index out of them and keep them in the data frame. If I run that, we get now the data frame looking like this. Now we notice we have two new columns, the city and the rank. And what I'm doing here is I'm saying index by city first, and then index by rank. So the first index is city, let's say for example Tripoli, and then the second rank is first. First index Tripoli, second rank, second, and so on and so forth. And like we said, we're actually keeping the columns that we've used for index. If we wanted to drop them, it's true by default. So drop is true by default. You notice now that we actually lose those columns. We can just do a shift tab here to have a look at the documentation. And you can see here is drop equals false by default, and we passed the keys. In the first place, we passed the keys that we wanted to use for indexing, and whether, for example, to do it in place or not, meaning instead of generating a new data frame, do it in place in the actual data frame that we're using. And we can have a look at the documentation here. I can have a look at some examples as well. So I hope the idea makes sense. It's quite simple and yet powerful to index by the first one and then the second one, and so on and so forth. And always remember, it's also possible to have hierarchical indexing for data for series. The concept is exactly the same. Another thing that we might be able to do is, let's say we don't want to drop the two columns that we use as keys for our index, and we'd like to do it in place. So let's have a look at the documentation quickly. Yeah, in place equals false by default. We'll set it to true. Obviously, if you don't want to do that and you want to create a new data frame, just say df1, for example, equals that, and it'll pass it on to the new data frame. But we don't want to create a new one. We'll just do it in place equals true. And now if we display the contents of data frame, we will have the hierarchical index that we have set. And to display the index, we can say df.index run, and you can see it's a multi-index. Although we use the term hierarchical index, but in pandas data frame, it's a multi-index. And you can see here we have these levels: Rome, Sydney, Tripoli. That's the first level, the city, and then the second level is first and second. This is the rank. Okay, and then it gives us here the names that we've used. I hope the idea makes sense. It's quite nice, easy, and yet quite powerful. Let's stop here, and I'll see you in the next video.